Hey guys, welcome. I'm always dancing when that little countdown clock goes off. You guys, welcome to episode 2 of Unfiltered. Welcome. Guys, like and share. I see you guys are already showing out in the chat box. We are on Facebook Live at the BC Wright, as well as our YouTube page, which is also BC Wright. Guys, we're super excited to have each and every one of you joining us today, and I am stoked about the guest we have. But guess what, guys? First and foremost, y'all know what today is. Today is March 17th. So happy St. Patrick's Day. Fun fact for you guys, St. Patrick's is actually the patron saint of Ireland and its national apostle, something I didn't know. He was born in Roman Britain. He was kidnapped at an early age and brought to Ireland when he was just 16 years old. He would later escape from Ireland, but then he went back to Ireland and was credited with bringing Christianity to their people. So those of you who are celebrating St. Patrick's Day, now you know a little bit something about it. But March 17th, guys, also marks another milestone in history. Guys, we're celebrating Women's History Month all month by honoring a woman or learning a fun fact that we may not have known before. So I'm going to put this up on the thing for you guys. Does anyone know who this woman is? If you might happen to know who this is, type it in the chat box on whatever platform that you're on. I didn't know who it was, but maybe somebody else does. So we're going to learn a little bit today. This person here, her name is actually Golda Meir. And she was actually elected as the Prime Minister of Israel on March 17th of 1969. She previously served as their Minister of Labor and Foreign Minister. She's actually the world's fourth woman, female, prime minister, and Israel's first to hold that office, and actually the only one. They described her as the Iron Lady of Israeli politics. So there is a fun fact that you did not know. Welcome to the broadcast, Shanita. I see you there. There's actually a book of quotes that she did, because apparently this woman would say some pretty thought-provoking things. But there's one thing she said that stood out that I want to bring to our attention today, because it's a perfect segue into our conversation. One thing she said was, one cannot and must not try to erase the past merely because it does not fit the present. What a fitting quote as we go into our conversation today. So guys, oh my goodness, like when I say I'm super excited, I get to introduce you guys to a dear friend of mine who I met practicing law. But not only that, guys, he is a game changer. I think that's the best way I can describe him. He has served as Associate General Counsel for the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development. And he probably doesn't know I know this, but I hear word on the street is that he negotiated the largest settlement under the Fair Housing Act in our region in the last 2 decades. So I'm so proud to know that about him. He also served as an assistant city attorney for the city of Atlanta. He also served as an attorney for the Office of the Solicitor in the U.S. Department of Labor. But in addition to practicing law, he does more than that. He's active on so many different platforms, and he just has purpose in his heart. And one of those things he does is as a professor at Morehouse, which is his alma mater, he led his moot court team to be champions. Wouldn't expect anything less. And he also has taught constitutional law, and most recently, a class on race and the law. I think I got that right. So please help me welcome to the platform none other than Attorney Winfield Murray. Are you with us?
How are you? Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning. It's so good to hear from you, and I'm excited that you decided to join us today.
Absolutely.
Okay, so listen, I want to start out by giving you an opportunity just to kind of introduce yourself to everyone. And then I want to jump into an article that I read in Atlanta Magazine that you authored.
Okay, so I'm an Atlanta native, raised and bred here. Grew up in Atlanta, went to Morehouse College, then I went to Howard University School of Law and the George Washington University School of Law. Had a unique opportunity to clerk for the Chief Judge of the U.S. Virgin Islands, and then returned here to practice as a prosecutor for 7 years. And I have done a variety of things working for the federal government, but one of the things that I'm most proud of is having the opportunity to teach and instruct at Morehouse College and really hopefully change the landscape, because as you know, there are so few attorneys of color. It's still an issue that we're trying to tackle. And so one of the things that I'm most proud of is having the opportunity to really get young African-American men interested in practicing law and getting them into law school. And so since 2013, I have been
That is amazing. And it's interesting that you say that. And you're very accomplished and you work in the community and you come from an accomplished family. I know your father was an OBGYN here in Atlanta as well. So it was interesting to open the Atlanta magazine and see this picture right here. I'm talking about, as a Black man, I don't have the liberty to make hasty moves. And I saw that, and it was a cartoon that was captured by one of the artists at the Atlanta, talking about an experience you had in Atlanta here. And you said something profound. You said in that moment, and I'll tell part of it because I want you to tell the other part of it. In that moment, as you were out with your friends in the bathroom, and someone's banging on the door telling you that this is whites only and demanding that you get out. I know it had to be a terrifying situation, but in that moment, you realized that Atlanta wasn't the bubble you thought it was, and that you actually lived in Georgia. And I was like, okay, this can happen to you. It can happen to any of us. But then something else happened, and you told the story about having your daughter in the car when you were pulled over. And I would love for you to share that with the viewers today, please. And we're not getting your mic. And if my chatters there can help us out, let me know if you were able to hear them or not. Yeah, I'm not seeing any audio on your mic. It was going up and down before, but let's see if we can help get your audio back. And while he's doing that, I encourage hey, Nanette, welcome to the broadcast. And while he's doing that, I encourage everyone to read this article. Welcome to the broadcast, Labiba, to read this article in the Atlanta. And Murray, you can go ahead. Welcome, Hakeem. Murray, you can go ahead and talk. Yes, Tyson saying no sound for you. Okay, let me see. All right, so while he gets his sound together, because we did have perfect sound earlier, so while he gets his sound together, just press on that settings button and see if you can connect your audio again. So while he's getting that together, I'm going to go ahead and he's going to come back in. I'm going to go ahead and tell you guys what happened so that we can get into our conversation on race and the law when he comes back. So in this article, what we learned was that after he left this event in Atlanta, where a gentleman is harassing him in the bathroom, banging on his stall, telling him, this is a whites only establishment. You have no business here. Get out. After that happened, he ended up getting pulled over by you. Are you there? He is here, but for some reason, I am not able to hear you, my friend. It's your audio is not coming in for me. Do you see your audio moving up and down? Welcome to the broadcast, Martin. I'm going to tell the story while you get your audio together. And so that then we can talk about race and the law, and you interrupt me whenever you get it. So after he leaves this establishment, what happened later was he was driving and was pulled over by a police officer. And upon being pulled over, the officer was talking to him and questioning him. And then all of a sudden, the officer looked in the back seat of his vehicle. And then his whole demeanor changed. And then he turned back to Murray and he said, have a nice day. And he let him go. Well, what happened was Murray turned around to see his 9-year-old daughter in the back of the car with tears streaming down her face because she was afraid. She was afraid of her dad getting pulled over by a police officer because of everything that's been happening in the world, because of everything that's been happening in the news. She was scared. And her crying did something to the officer and really just reminded us all of the state that we live in. And some people think that this kind of behavior only happens to people who live in certain neighborhoods, or this kind of behavior only happens to people who, dress a certain way. That's not true. He was pulled over and the impact is the same. It doesn't really matter what your income bracket level is. When you're pulled over as an African American in this country, you have to realize that there's a different impact on our children. There's a different impact on the person. We have to respond differently. And even him, as a practicing attorney, as a professor at Morehouse teaching constitutional law and race in the law, as a member of Leadership Atlanta, as a recognized public figure here, even he had to go through that very same thing. So I'm excited about him getting back on and being able to get his audio together, because this conversation on reality, race, and reform is definitely needed. So I'm actually going to change the program up a little bit and move the Be Blessed segment to right now, because he's still getting his audio together. Although I think he might be back with us. I just hear him pop in. Hey, are you here with us?
Hey, can you hear me
Hey,
now?
we can hear you. Great. So I just finished telling the story about the Atlantan, and don't worry, I know how to move around. I was just going to do a different segment and bring you back. So I appreciate that. Okay, so you are here now. So why don't you take over the conversation? I've told about what happened into the Atlantan as a segue for, how what happens with race and law affects all of us. Why don't you give us a kind of a backdrop of where you stand on all of this?
Um, Wait, do you mean from the magazine's perspective or just in
Yeah,
general?
just the history of law and race in our country and where we go from there.
Well, I'll tell you, I think that in a lot of ways, obviously, we've made progress. But, one of the things that sort of stood out in my mind is that experience that happened to me in that bathroom in a restaurant in Buckhead just still demonstrates how important diversity is, how important inclusion is, how important equity is. Um, those guys that sort of approached me, they weren't old people. They weren't people that were in their 60s. They were people that were, in their early, late 20s, early 30s. So these are people that, are, young and are in the workforce, and, whether they are lawyers or in some other capacity, or working in some other capacity, they are still affecting and impacting the community in which we live. Um, Recently, as you said, it says that they're not hearing me, I don't think.
They're hearing you. They're asking if you can turn your volume up just a little, or maybe speak closer to the mic.
Okay. Is this any better?
I can hear you loud and clear.
Okay. So, one of the things that I've had the opportunity to do recently is start teaching a course called Race and Law. And, the thing about it is that I've learned is that learning never stops. It is a continuum. And so, honestly, right along with my students, I have been learning a lot as well. One of the things that I recently learned is really that after slavery ended in the South, there was a program that was instituted called convict leasing, where basically African American men were arrested for petty crimes such as vagrancy, homelessness, and sometimes for no crimes at all. They were placed in jail, and then they were utilized as basically free labor for various jobs in and around the city. One of the people that did this most egregiously was a former mayor of the city, Mayor English, who, if you're in the city of Atlanta, you may have heard of English Avenue, English Park, which are named after him. But he owned the jail. He also owned the Chattahoochee Brick Company. And Black men were arrested. They were then made to work at his brick factory. I think they were churning out 200,000 plus bricks. The operation ran 24 hours a day. Many of the Black men that worked there lost their lives. He became very wealthy because, of course, he wasn't paying a salary. So when you just look at the history of the way that African Americans, not just men, but women as well, have been treated in the society, and the laws that have been utilized to shape and build communities, and you see
Mhm.
that African Americans are usually at the either they're being disproportionately impacted, negatively impacted, or just flat out wronged by the system of laws that we have in place.
Wow. So you said, because everybody's like, huh, what? So you're saying there was actually a law that allowed this to happen. So,
So if you look at the 13th Amendment, it eradicates slavery except for that deals with, incarceration. And so it was very easy for, here we have a society in the South that was based on agriculture. When you now say that we can't have slave labor, then you're now cutting into my profits. If I wasn't paying my workforce before, now I am paying my workforce, then that cuts into my profits. And I'm certainly not going to go out there and work, 500 acres or 1,000 acres. So where, oh, where am I going to go to get help? So why don't we just start arresting people? And so, there for another 100 years was this convict leasing program that existed. And the thing about it too is that the Chattahoochee Brick Company, I think, was located right off of Bolton Road, off of 285, so it wasn't even far. Recently, Norfolk Southern was going to use it as a refueling station for their trains, but because of community pressure, which I think is a good thing, it now appears that they're going to make a memorial for all of the African American men that lost their lives. So.
mm, wow. Thank you so much. So many people in the chat are like, whoa. So knowledge is power. And so we don't know that. So even after slavery ended, it was still slavery. We just called it something else. We still found ways to do it. And so that was a while ago, but we still have some things on our books now, right? That are disadvantageous for our society as a whole. And there's still a lot of things that need to be reformed when it comes to race in the law. And I can remember practicing in Clayton County at that time. I had a client and he asked, well, what is your goal? I said, my goal is to make sure that if you're telling me you did this, that you don't get a sentence that's 5 times worse than that boy in Alpharetta who did the same thing, because it happens all the time when you go back and pull the records. So talk to us a little bit about race and reform.
Well, one thing that I just want to say, first of all, you made a good point about that convict leasing, that there's still it was still a form of slavery. In fact, there's a great book out about that, and it's called Slavery by Another Name, which goes exactly to your point, that it was still slavery, it just went by another name.
Mm-hmm.
So when we're talking about reform, I think that one of the most important things is to have diversity. And again, that's why I encourage so many of my students to go into the practice of law. You will hear over and over again, oh, there are too many lawyers, but there are not enough lawyers of color. There are not enough lawyers that represent people that look like you and me. And that's the thing that needs to be changed. We need more African American public defenders. We need more African American prosecutors. We need more African American judges. We need more African Americans that are working on policy initiatives. So, those are the things that we really need and are important today. You, just like I, worked as a prosecutor initially, and I will tell you that when I began my career as a prosecutor, and I don't think that I've even shared this with you, you know, after about 3 weeks in, I really started to become physically ill because, you know, in a city that is as progressive as Atlanta, the city that's too busy to hate, right?
Mm-hmm.
Everyone that was in lockup, everyone that was out on a copy of charges, they looked like you and me. It was as if there was no other ethnicity that lived in this city. Now, I'm not saying that people who commit crimes should not be prosecuted, but what I am saying is that it should be fair. It should be not that only African Americans are being arrested. It should be, if there's a law on the book, then we all get arrested if we break that law. Unfortunately, so many times, either we're not either we're being arrested in a disproportionately higher number, or we're being convicted at a disproportionately higher number, or both. And one story that I relate to my Morehouse students, and I hope I'm not talking too long, but one of the stories that I relate to my Morehouse students is that I had a group of Morehouse students that were, taking pictures for the SGA a few years back. They were all dressed in suits. They had a tripod and 35 millimeter camera as they were taking pictures for the SGA. Well, they were at an abandoned building because they thought it would be a cool backdrop. Well, a police officer came up, and it was a white police officer, and said basically they were under arrest for trespassing. Um, they said, hey, we didn't mean to do anything. We weren't doing anything here, but just taking pictures. The response was, you're still going to jail tonight. Apparently, other officers arrived on the scene and of color and tried to dissuade the officer from arresting them. And they were arrested. And the problem with that is that, if they weren't, you know, students of color, would they have been arrested, or would they have just, said, you guys have to move it along? You're on abandoned property, yes, but it's still trespassing. This is whatever. Um, because that arrest goes on their record. And ultimately, I helped them to get the charges dismissed. But the arrest goes on their record, the conviction goes on their record. And what does that do? That impacts their ability to get a job, that impacts their ability to go to grad school. And that's not just happening here in the city, that's happening in municipalities all over this country. And I just am hard pressed to believe that if they weren't African American, if they would have just been allowed to go, here they obviously they weren't there to do any damage.
Mm. It's interesting that you said that, but there are studies that back up everything that you're saying. There's a disproportionate number of African Americans in jails across the country, even in places where the majority of the people who live there are white. And so it's disproportionate, period. But here's another thing that people don't look at. Getting a mark on your record, it affects your ability to get a job, of course, but it also affects your ability to get housing. Because when you're putting on those applications now, they're asking you, have you been convicted of anything? So now these people don't have anywhere to work, and then they have a harder time getting somewhere to live. So it is important that we have reform in our criminal justice system. And when you were talking about the fact that we need more African Americans in the law, we need more African Americans in the law, but we need more aware African Americans in the law. Not just practicing the law because it's a profession, or practicing the law because it's a title, or practicing it because I'm going to get mine, but practicing from the perspective of the fact that we really do have the opportunity to make long-lasting, impactful change. I don't think I've ever told you this, but practicing at the city of Atlanta is actually what made me want to be a defense attorney. Why? Because I saw so many of us coming in and out of those doors, but I also saw a lack of adequate representation because you had overworked public defenders. They were overworked and underinterested because it seemed like the same thing over and over again, and people can become numb and start to treat every situation the same. Anytime I, as a prosecutor, would have to go tap the person on the shoulder and say, that there's a defense to this and it's right here, it's a problem. Right. And so it speaks to the fact that they're overworked and disinterested, and maybe not really connected to the passion that we're supposed to have when we're in those positions.
Well, I'll tell you, that's honestly why I care so deeply about this organization called Gideon's Promise, that provides resources and training to public defenders across this country. Because like you, when I was working with public defenders, it's not that they weren't, some of them were great, but like you said, they were overworked, and they were under-resourced. They didn't even have the same amount of resources that we had as prosecutors, which meant that their ability to adequately defend their client is, at risk. So, that's one of the reasons that I got involved with Gideon's Promise. I will say that being a prosecutor sort of really shaped and changed and molded my career, because I saw so much so fast. One of the other things that I will say is that, you know, having the opportunity to work in Atlanta's community court, I thought was great. First of all, it costs less to run a community court than it does to place people in jail. But also, the rate of recidivism usually goes down threefold if you send someone through community court, because most people.
Murray, for the people who don't know and who aren't aware, because this is part of the reform, tell people what community court is.
Okay, so community court basically tries to reduce the rate of recidivism through alternative sentencing. So instead of placing someone in jail, you do any number of things. It could be, so for instance, when I was working at community court, if we had a high school student, we may say you have to complete high school. You have to, if you're not enrolled in high school, you have to get a GED. You have to show that you're applying for jobs. If there's a substance abuse issue, then you enroll in some type of substance abuse treatment program. It can be community service. You know, if you went and sprayed graffiti in a neighborhood, well, not only are you going to go back to clean up that graffiti, but you're going to go pick up tires and things of that nature, so you make the community better. And you're also making the community which you harmed whole again after you committed the crime. And so what we found is that, again, the rate of recidivism went down threefold. People don't typically, I don't think, just want to commit crimes. I found that people committed crimes usually for a couple of reasons. Either lack of education, lack of financial resources, mental health issues, substance abuse issues. Now, I know, yes, there are some people that commit crimes and none of those factors come into play. But by and large, you can track it back to one of those three things. And so if you solve the underlying problem, if you remedy the substance abuse issue, if you're able to get them a job, then the chances of them committing a crime again are less. Why are we not doing this more? If we know that this works, if we know that the rate of recidivism goes down threefold, if we know that it costs our taxpayers less to have a community court, then why are we not doing this more? And one of the things that I have to say, and I really hate to step on toes, but you asked me to be on the program, Bernadette, so I'm just
Bring it.
say that especially in cities where African Americans are in leadership positions in charge, I just would expect to see a greater emphasis being placed on those things that are going to keep African Americans from being disproportionately impacted and disenfranchised in the cities which they have helped to build. Um, yeah.
That's good. And when you were talking, one of the reasons that came to mind as to why people don't do community court, I mean, community court's amazing because you still go through the court system, but you don't have the typical court outcome because it's really about making the person whole and speaking to what is the issue that's causing the problem, right?
And
So one of the things I'm gonna let you, and I'm gonna let you take this away from here because I want you to answer this as well. One of the things I think that stops it is because it's money. They're private prisons. If I think about it from a larger perspective, they've privatized some of the prisons and and outsourced some of the work from the state. So people are making money off of people getting locked up. They have plans out there to build, they're like estimating the amount of crime that they expect, I guess, us to commit over the next few years and building prisons. But go ahead with your comment, Murray.
so again, that just goes to show you that initially African Americans were disproportionately impacted by slavery. You know, their slaves were African Americans. Then we had convict leasing. Today, we still have private prisons. One of the interesting facts that I found out about was that private prisons usually decide whether they're going to build a new jail based upon how many students are reading at or below the third grade reading level. Third grade, not 12th grade, not 11th grade, not 10th grade. They're looking at third graders. How many of those third graders are reading below the reading level? And if there's a certain amount that are reading below reading level for that grade, then they decide then and there that they're going to build a prison. Why? Because it goes back to my point. Lack of education, lack of resources, higher probability that you are going to commit a crime. This is a business. Prisons can be, private prisons are a business. So then when you have a prison being built, now let's just take this, let's just, look at this for a second. If you are deciding to build a prison based upon third grade reading level, why not? Why are we not putting more resources into education so that we don't have to build the prison at all? If you're in the third grade, you're not that far along where we can't right the wrong, where we can't get you to at reading level. You are 9 years old. We can teach you to read. We can get you the help and the services that you need so that we don't need to build a prison. But that is the problem when we make privatizing prisons a business.
It's so funny. As soon as you said that, I typed, so we build in a prison instead of a school.
Mhm.
Like What are we doing? And so we've got a comment over here that I'm going to highlight from Hakeem. And he says here, they don't want to rehabilitate because the money doesn't come from prevention. Do you see? The money doesn't come from there because we as a society, we want the goal to be less people in prison. But you as a business owner who is in the business of operating prisons, you want to build more prisons.
Right.
So
Absolutely.
so part of the solution is community court. Part of the solution is getting more people who are connected to what's going on, who are woke, for lack of a better word, to be involved in the process. But it seems like part of it too is just a shift in legislation across the country, and some of that reform has already started to happen. So talk to us a little bit about your thoughts on that.
Well, I do think that there has been some reform that has started to happen. I just don't think that it's enough. I mean, honestly, I still go into courtrooms today, and everyone in there is still African American. It's still just as demoralizing as it was when I started my career way back when in 2002, and all of that. Like, it's still just very demoralizing. I do want to just say that I know that diversity isn't going to solve all of the ills, but I think it is one of the best starting points. And I also
Mhm.
should say that while we know that we have great lawyers, while we know that we have some great police officers, we need diversity even amongst the police force because, it's really sort of starting there. The
Yeah.
police officers, just like with that group of Morehouse students, they could have given them a warning. They chose not to. And so, what we have to do though is we have to start speaking up. It takes time, but we have to speak up. The other thing that I need to address really is also it's something that each of us can do. So often, well, first of all, I'm sorry, I have so many thoughts coming
Uh,
at one time. Make sure that you are contacting your representative and people at the local level, like they matter. Like we always are so concerned about presidential elections, but make sure that your local leaders hear you, know that you're concerned about this issue. Criminal justice reform impacts us all, not just some of us, not just the people that are arrested. It impacts us all. The other thing is that there is something that we also can do. When you get a jury notice, what we often do is we try to figure out a way not to serve as a juror. Like we don't want to give up the time. We don't want to, they're
Miss
not
Work.
compensate you, miss work, find childcare, whatever the case may be. Unfortunately, what that means is that all of those African Americans that I'm seeing in jail, right? It means that when they go to court, they will not have a jury of their peers. Now, peers can mean different things, right? A jury of your peers doesn't just mean race, it can mean age, right? Someone who is 70 years old may not look at a situation exactly the same way as someone who's 23. Someone who is African American may not look at something the same way as someone who is white. So, a jury of your peers is larger than just race. But I can tell you this, that if we don't ever have people of color going to these jury to be on it serving on a jury, then that's a huge problem. The likelihood of that person being convicted goes up exponentially just simply because they're not being served by a jury of their peers. And so what ends up happening is usually you get people who are retired, people who are older, people who are white that are sitting on these juries and making a decision. And, it's hard for them to relate, identify with some things that, we as African Americans just understand in an African American community. And if the person is 23, then, you don't have a jury of your peers on age, race, or any of those factors, probably not on socioeconomics either, right? Because if they're able to retire, that probably means that they had a pretty good job. So there's no understanding there. We're missing each other. So I just want to make that point.
That was so good because I think a lot of people don't look at our responsibility even as jurors because people are like, what can I do? Well, you can raise your hand when that jury letter comes in because you're right. A lot of people look for excuses. They're like, I can't take $25 for going to jury duty. I make more than that. I have bills to pay, but society requires it. Because what people don't understand is when the jury comes there, we as attorneys go through this process called voir dire, where we get to ask questions, we get to figure out what the biases are, we get to kind of vet out the holes in it. And so if you're looking at a room full of people who don't identify with the client, have never been in that client situation, don't know anything about that client's culture, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, we're in trouble. So we definitely have to do our role. So, I'm going to have you back again. I'm seeing all these comments and chat. So give us some closing thoughts before I let you go out of here today on just reality, race, and and reform, or whatever you want to tell us today.
Yeah. So I think in closing, there is something that each of us can do, right? Regardless of if you practice law, don't practice law, one of the things that you can do is raise your voice, like you just said. Make sure that your representatives and local officials hear from you. I had the unique opportunity to work for City Hall, and I know that, sort of the squeaky wheel gets the oil. So those people that are calling their city council members, those people that are calling the mayor, those people that are calling their House of Reps representative, and all of that, those people's concerns eventually get heard. And I know that it's laborious, having to work, having to raise kids, and then you're asking me to make these phone calls and write letters and all of this type of stuff. But really and truly, we can all make time for that we want to do. And some of these issues, like criminal justice reform, are just too important not to make a priority. I think we have seen, just recently, how many unarmed Black men have been shot. Unarmed, Black men that have been shot. Since 1991, when Rodney King, that was the first time that we really saw it on air. And since that time, we still see it. We still don't see officers being convicted, at the rate that they probably should. I think anytime you're shooting someone that doesn't have a weapon, that's a problem. Now, maybe they need to be arrested, right? If they did something wrong, they need to be arrested. But some of these things, having a broken tail light, having a broken headlight, does not warrant losing their life over. It just doesn't. And so, race race relations, criminal justice reform should be a priority for us all, and we should all make time to make sure that we are being heard on this issue.
Thank you so much, you guys. Give it up for our guest today, Attorney Winfield Ward Murray, Esquire, LLM. He's also a professor at Morehouse. Why don't you give us your Twitter handle or any other handle so that the viewers can follow along with what you're doing?
Well, I'm not really on Twitter.
Well, Twitter, well, yeah, that. Twitter or Facebook, or where can they find you?
Well, they can find me on LinkedIn. You can just Google my name, and the same is true for Facebook. So, I'd love to hear from you. I always enjoy these types of panels, and thank you for giving us an opportunity to talk about these issues.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you so much. Guys, this was a fantastic segment, and I am just excited about everything that we learned today, and it looks like you guys are too. And you know what time it is. It is time for our Be Blessed segment. Unfiltered is committed to giving away cold hard cash every episode in this season. And we have a testimonial from the person who received last week that I want to share with you before this week's blessing.
Hi, Bernadette Roseanne Moreno here out of Austin, Texas. Thank you for having me on Unfiltered. Please like and share. You never know who you might impact with this show. And speaking of impact, last week you had a cash giveaway for some lucky person that gets the number between 1 and 155, and boom, I nailed it. I just started laughing. How in the world did I win that? And I said, that money is not for me. And as soon as I received it, I sent it off to family. And let me tell you about that family, special people. Young family, mom, stay-at-home mom, dad was in the Iraq war, PTSD, suffers tremendously from that. And they, he's back and decides this was 5 years ago. They're going to have a family. They get pregnant. They're leading up to baby showers and all the excitement of the firstborn. And then when she's born, she has Zellweger syndrome, which is a genetic disorder with a life expectancy of maybe 2 years. And their baby passes away. Heartbreaking, just heartbreaking. And then they kind of get through that. And then a couple of years later, they decide they're going to try again. They have a baby. And thank you, Lord, for the blessing. She's healthy and vibrant all over the place. And then 2 years pass and she's about 2 now. And they decide we need to give her a sibling. And so they do that and they get pregnant and they're excited and the baby showers come again and everything happens. She's delivered. And again, the baby has Zellweger's. And now they know that there's a very short life expectancy. They don't know how long, maybe 2 years if they're lucky. And they embrace it. And they thank Lord for giving the time to be a parent to this beautiful child for as long as he decides to give that to them. And in the meantime, they've started a ministry and just embraced it and sharing their journey with everyone and it's raw and it's real, but it's their journey. And finances are tough for them because they have medications. They have to stay home all day. They're going back and forth from hospitals and there's no way mama can work. So that $100 is a huge impact. And I just send it to them because there's probably something they need and they can use the money for that. So thank you to your sponsor who allowed that to happen. And we were able to impact somebody's life. And you don't ever know. Maybe your life needs to be impacted, or maybe it's for you to impact somebody else. You make that decision. Thank you, Bernadette. Have a great day, everyone.
That is fantastic, guys. Thank you so much. And I love that Roseanne did her testimonial because here's the deal. Whatever we're giving away, whether it's $100 this week, and sometimes it's going to be even more than that, there may be someone who's on this call who thinks, oh, I'm good financially. I don't need the money. Honestly, it's just about getting a win sometimes. And maybe that win is something that you can pass on to someone else. Maybe it's just a win for you because you haven't been able to do anything just personal for yourself. I don't know what it is. I don't care what it is. We don't care what it is. Our sponsors who are contributing to this just want you to have a win. So this week's Be Blessed sponsor actually is going to be Tyson Thompson. Tyson Thompson of phenomenalpower.net. She actually works with a solar company, guys. And she says, stop renting your electricity. She is sponsoring today's giveaway, guys. You guys can contact her at 312-998-2256, guys. So I'm excited about this. And you guys know how we do. As we get ready to transition to the next slide, if you know someone who needs to be participating in this, you need to go ahead and tell them to get on the broadcast, tell them to like and share, because it is time for you guys to be blessed. So we're about to start this little countdown timer. I'm going to do like I do and write this number down on this little box here. And you guys, let's get started. Start typing your numbers in the chat.
Sometimes we're not ourselves. There's no one I can turn to. And I know all the feelings that we shared out in the past. And I know your relationships are never meant to last. And I'll get sometimes, but I'll be alright. I know times are tough, but I've had enough. Moving on.
Okay, guys, I am looking and I see that no one guessed the number for today, but there are a couple who tied. Actually, I believe the number today, guys, is 43. So today's number is 43, and the closest that I see to it would be Avril with 38 and Alona at 38. You guys can check me in the chat if someone else was closer to the number 43. Y'all make sure that I didn't miss anything. And don't forget, I can't see it unless you are on live on my Facebook page at the BC Wright, or you're joining us on YouTube under BC Wright. So if I am correct about that, then we are going to have a tiebreaker between Avril and Alona. You guys, Avril and Alona, you guys will be participating in this, and I need each of you, and I'm gonna write it down. I need each of you to type a number between 1 and 20, and whoever is closest to what I'm writing down is going to be the winner. So Alona and Avril, I need each of you to type in the chat a number between 1 and 20 as the tiebreaker. Between you two. So I'm going to give you guys a quick second to do that. And just a reminder of who our sponsor is. Our sponsor is Tyson Thompson from Phenomenal Power. All right, we see Avril coming in with the number 19. Where are you at, Alona? Alona, we need a number 1 through 20. Oh, well, okay, so there we go with that. So let me get back over here. Okay, guys. So like, I don't know what's going on here, but it happened last week and it just happened again today. The winner is the winner. It's going to be Alona, who guessed that the number would be 11. So Alona, you are the blessed person today. Our sponsor, Tyson Thompson, is the contributor today. You are going to be receiving $100. Send me a private message about whether you want that via Cash App or Apple Pay or Google Pay. So congratulations on receiving your blessing and tuning into today's episode. So you guys, we're gonna go ahead and close out today's show, but of course, you know, I gotta have my thoughts first. So today is St. Patrick's Day. Okay, so we're celebrating the fact that it's St. Patrick's Day. And so everyone is going out and they might be partying and they might be celebrating and having a good time. But here's the bottom line, guys. People are celebrating, but there's always a backstory. The story of the Irish in America is not just about green rivers and leprechauns and four-leaf clovers. It's actually a story about how Americans continue to wrestle with a familiar spirit called fear. And it's time that we call it out together. So here's the deal, guys. When the Great Potato Famine happened, it hit Ireland in 1845. There was close to about 1 million poor and uneducated Irish Catholics that began pouring into America. And they came to this country because they were literally starving. Many of the refugees actually came over here on cargo ships. Interesting fact, some of those cargo ships had been previously used to transport slaves from Africa. So they came over here hungry and sick. They spent their last pennies to come to this country, and they were treated like freight. As a matter of fact, they were herded like livestock. Does any of this sound familiar? There were dark and cramped quarters, and the passengers were literally sleeping in excrement and vomit. So many people died. As a matter of fact, they said 85,000 passengers who sailed to North America because they were starving and wanting to come to the land of the free died. And they started calling these coffin ships because they never reached the destination, and those bodies will forever lay on the ocean floor. So upon their arrival, here's what happened. Those who survived were literally despised by this country for their religious beliefs. They were despised by this country because they had these unfamiliar accents, and America had become a Protestant nation. So the immigrants got here and they were not welcomed with open arms. As a matter of fact, they had to look for menial jobs. And when the Irish Americans would take to the city streets to celebrate their heritage on St. Patrick's Day, do you know what the newspapers did? They decided to portray them as drunken, belligerent monkeys. And I have to show this picture because it's just something, again, that's familiar about this type of behavior. They were portrayed as monkeys in the media on several different occasions. And not only that, guys, but when a newspaper would publish a job opening, they would actually say, Irish need not apply. But guess what happened? the Americans who were Irish, we'll call them the American Irish, soon began to realize that because of their large numbers, remember, thank you, nothing has changed. Millions came over here, but they soon began to realize because of their large numbers, they had power that they had not exploited. So what did they do? They started to organize. They started to vote as a block. They became known as the Green Machine, which was so important in swinging the vote that they were able to elect their own people into office. When I say their own people, I'm not talking about white people. I'm talking about people who thought like them. I'm talking about people who wanted what they wanted. I'm talking about people who would fight for them because they pulled together and began to elect people who represented their values, their beliefs, and their strength. They truly understood we, the people. Doesn't that story sound so familiar about what happens when you come to this country and what happens when that spirit of fear takes over? But here's the difference. They found power in who they were. They found power in their sheer numbers. Guys, we, the people, remain the power. It's time for us to get together and conquer the fear that has taken over our nation, because it's fear that caused them to treat people who don't look like them differently. It's fear that causes us to reject things that we don't understand. And it's time for us to quash it out. But how do we do that? We do that by first recognizing it, second, calling it out, and third, deciding that we're going to be different. It's time for a reality check. It's time for reform. Not only across our country, but reform of our minds. I thank you guys for joining us on this episode of Unfiltered, and happy St. Patrick's Day. We look forward to seeing you here next week.